Baby, you're listening to the POW movement.
Welcome to the Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and this week on the show, my guest is Cody Townsend. I spoke with Cody a few years back about his life and times for another podcast, and it was fascinating. This time around, I cut 20 minutes of that interview into the podcast to give Cody's background and then dive deeper onto some things that I missed. Then we jump in the present day for an hour of new content. It's a great chat where we talk about the 50 Project, ski media, Shane McConkey, and a whole lot more. It's a look into the life of one of skiing's biggest personalities and a guy who is more informed and educated than most professional skiers. I do want to give you a heads up that this interview was recorded at 2 different times, and Cody and I sound different on each recording. I hope that doesn't bother you. Before we get into the show, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my spring break. And while it wasn't the Daytona Beach spring break I experienced in 1993, it was the adult version of spring break. A ski trip with my boy, and the goal was to hit a place that we had never been to before. The spot we chose was White Pass, a mom and pop place off the beaten path, and home to Olympic medalists Phil and Steve Mayer and Steve's son, pro skier Andy Mayer. I knew they were going to have great skiing, but that's really all I knew about the place. And when we pulled up, there was no looking for parking spots. We parked as close as you can get to the base area. Then we headed over to the ticket window, and our lift tickets were $65 for me, $40 for my kid, and the mountain was completely empty on spring break. And I hear it's like that most of the time. It was dumping the whole time we were there, which was a bonus, and the skiing was great. There was a lot of fun, wide open terrain, long runs, steep stuff, and from what Andy Mayer was telling me, they have world-class tree skiing there, which we didn't get a chance to get into. The mountain definitely has something for everyone. And when you do a mom and pop ski area for spring break, you go into it wondering if it's actually going to feel like a vacation. But staying at the White Pass Inn right across from the base area really did create that feeling. Our room slept 4 people, had a full kitchen, and reminded me of a cross between a college dorm room and a ski bum's place. It cost $300 for 2 nights, but price is not why you stay there. You stay there for the 100-degree pool that looks up at the ski hill. You grab yourself a beer, and there are some rules. You can't bring glass, you can't bring 12-packs or cases or coolers. I don't know why they have that rule, but you can bring single beers, as many as you want. And sitting in a 100-degree pool after a hard day of skiing is a refreshing feeling, and I highly recommend doing it. It really tied the whole trip together, and I didn't know what to expect from White Pass. And now I definitely will be going back next year. If I had to give you the negatives of this trip, well, White Pass is 3 hours away from Seattle, and that's a little further than I'm used to driving, and there is absolutely nothing to do there at night. I highly recommend bringing groceries and cooking in your condo because there is no place to get dinner, but you don't go to White Pass for nightlife. You go there for a hot pool and some awesome skiing. And while the locals won't want me to say this, White Pass is one of those places that everyone who lives in Seattle or the greater Seattle area should check out at least once next season. If you ski or snowboard and you don't like lift lines and you want easy parking and cheap lift tickets, White Pass is the place. This is not a paid advertisement by any means. I just wanted to share the beta with you. Now I want to ask you to do a few things for me. First, I want to ask you to follow me on Instagram at The Powell Movement. Tell your friends about the show and support my great sponsors who make the show happen. They are Evo, Rescue Water, the 10 Barrel Brewery, and Spy Optic. Now, let's talk with Cody Townsend. The last time I sat down with Cody Townsend, we didn't sit down together because we were on a landline, and we talked for about 45 minutes into a podcast, and all of a sudden my computer shuts down. I'm 3 months into my podcasting career, and one of my biggest guests that I've had on, and the whole thing, I lose it all. I'm shitting my pants. I'm almost in tears, and Cody's like, dude, don't worry about it. We'll do it again tomorrow. Now, I made some bad decisions on how I recorded back then. And in the field, in your work, have you ever had technology issues that have ruined expensive photo shoots?
Yeah, I had one this last week when drones all of a sudden fall out of the sky, start making weird noises when they're 300 feet up, and then just tomahawk out of the sky into oblivion, and it's gone. That was towards the end of the day, so all your drone footage, gone.
And the drone's not cheap either.
No, it is actually about a 4-day-old drone. So my cinematographer, Beyond Salomon, who had just bought it, was all fired up on it and is like, oh my God, are you kidding? That's kind of what we deal with a lot, is formatted SD cards that frag out, and all of a sudden you're like, we lost that whole day. What the hell? So that's part of it.
Have you ever lost the memory cards, lost the cameras, or got stuff stolen, and you're like, I was just in Europe for 2 weeks and I might have well stayed home?
I can't think of anything exactly like that. I've had some stories of like that where these guys went on a trip to Alaska and were driving home and then stopped in Whitehorse and then got their car broken into and everything stolen. That's just like the most nightmare you can think of. But it hasn't happened to me, luckily, but I have heard that. I actually heard another story. These snowmobile filmers who were editing their movie, they all had it on one drive, and something like fell out of the computer and shattered the drive into like 1,000 pieces, and their whole movie was gone. Just done. You're like, I spent all year filming this, and now it's done.
You're a California kid. Santa Cruz. I believe that's where you were born and raised and where you got into skiing.
Yeah, it is. I was a beach kid growing up.
Skiing on the weekends and surfing as much as you could when you weren't up on the hill?
For the most part, yeah. I started skiing first. I started skiing when I was like 2 years old because my parents would go up on the weekends and they just loved it. And then I started surfing when I was like 10, even though I was like boogie boarding and always in the ocean. So yeah, I was definitely doing a little bit of both at all times growing up.
Did you have a place in Tahoe? Did you have one of those nice San Francisco mansions up in Squaw Valley?
No, we had the exact opposite of that. We had like a literal Forest Service cabin. It's on Forest Service land, and it's a tiny little cabin that was heated by a wood stove. Yeah, it's a real cabin. Actually, C.R. Johnson once came into the cabin the first time he was there, and he said, "This could fit into my living room," when he was like 10, and not trying to be offensive, just happened to be.
When your parents put you into skiing, are they putting you into the Mighty Mite program up in Squaw Valley?
Yeah, I mean, I was put in right away, pretty young age. Yeah, that's where I've met some of my best friends still to this day. You know, one of my best friends that we ski together almost every day. We still ski together, of course. George Jelty, we met in Mighty Mites. I met C.R. Johnson in Mighty Mites. I mean, a lot of just local guys that are still around here that are kind of part of the crew. Came up meeting them at 10 years old in the little Mighty Mite crew.
When did you actually start racing in the Mighty Mites? Does that start right away?
Yeah, you kind of like transition into it, but like really didn't get serious to like about 13 is when you're in J3.
And how were you as a ski racer?
I was pretty good. I won quite a lot of races. There was one year where I think I won like every single slalom event, and the only person that was my competition was Julia Mancuso because she's ridiculous, and we used to more compete against each other. Then I made it through like one Junior Olympics when I was like 16 and turned into a speed skier. I love downhill. And then I also convinced my parents to let me move up to Tahoe for the winters and train because, you know, I was trying to tell them, but like, look, I'm like doing really good. I only ski like 45 days a year. Like if I could get up there and train, maybe I'll actually be really good at this. So I like kind of got to move up to Tahoe and live at a buddy's house when I was 16.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. No parents. I can imagine that being a racer, there's a huge cost associated with that. Was there any strain on the family from putting you through racing, sending you up to Tahoe to live in high school?
Yeah, it's such a financial burden. Racing is so expensive. And I swear there's like a direct correlation between how rich you are and how well you're going to end up doing in your career as a ski racer. I mean, my dad was a English teacher in high school and a football coach, and my mom was a journalist. So like they have a very average middle income.
7 figures.
Yeah, exactly. Just rolling in it. I mean, it was so hard on my parents that like my dad worked as a parking lot attendant for like 3 years so he could get me a pass to Squaw. That's how tight we were financially. And as I was going through ski racing, and I loved racing downhill, but there's a lot of ski racing I really didn't love. And it just became kind of a burden. I just almost felt guilty if I wasn't having a lot of fun and enjoying it or doing well. It was just like, man, this is so hard on our family. Like, I can't keep doing this.
Do you have any brothers or sisters, or are you an only child?
I'm an only child. And I swear if I had another brother or sister, I probably wouldn't have been a skier or even got that far because they were spending all their money supporting me.
You grew up in a football family. Your dad was a football coach. I think he played college football, not really sure where he played. And I think he even tried out for the pros. Were you pushed into football at a young age?
I grew up around football, and I grew up going to the practice fields with my dad and tackling pads and stuff. And it was just like a fixture on the field for the high school football team since I was about 9, 10 years old, maybe even younger. And I knew I was always going to play football. And I ended up playing quarterback in high school. And it was really fun. I really enjoyed football. I think it's like a game that's very obviously physical because you are hitting people really hard, but it's also really, really strategic and smart game. So definitely still enjoy watching it.
One thing was interesting was your family was tight with the Dilfer family, and you knew Trent Dilfer being a starting high school quarterback. Did you look to family friend Trent Dilfer for advice, and what do you get from an athlete at that caliber?
So Trent's family, my dad and Trent's dad were best friends. He was the best man at my dad's wedding. And then they were football coaches forever. So I grew up around their whole family. And Trent's a bit older than me, but he's known me since I was a baby and I grew up with them. It's actually quite the opposite, though. Growing up watching Trent, I was like a ball boy for my dad as he was his football coach. And I watched Trent single-handedly destroy other football teams in high school. He was head and shoulders better than everyone. And what it ended up doing to me, which is something I only just kind of revealed to my dad like maybe 5 years ago, was it made me not want to be a quarterback and continue an NFL career because I watched Trent be a better athlete than everyone on the field at football, basketball, golf. He was just an insane athlete. Then I watched him go to college and just be one of the best, set all these records, and then get drafted second overall. And then I watched him be what's the definition of a game manager quarterback in the NFL. He was like pretty middling. So he was at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers when I was playing. And I remember thinking like, I am not head and shoulders better than everyone on this field right now. I am pretty average. You know, I had some interest from colleges, but I just knew I was like, I'm not Trent. I am not as fast as him, as big as him, as just the athlete that he was. So I looked at him and I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to be an NFL quarterback. I mean, he's struggling in the NFL. What am I going to do? I'm not even going to get there. I'm going to get to a D2 school, play for a while, and then just waste 4 or 5 years of skiing. So for me, it was actually seeing him push me away from football, which was interesting. It was kind of nice because then it saved me 4 or 5 years of learning that I'm not good enough to go to the NFL and realize those chances are very slim. So from there, when I went to college, you know, I think my dad held out a lot of hopes that I was going to play in college, and he held it out for quite a long time and kind of always pushing it. And I was just like, man, I'm going to be a skier. That's what I want to do. This is what I love. And I actually have a chance to do that. So that's why I focused on.
Your dad being a high school football coach, I mean, I just think of the bike shorts with like a tin of dip in it. I don't know if he did any of that, but I'm sure he wore the bike shorts. But those guys want their kids to be pro football players or at least play football. And I look at skiing as the dirtbag alternative to being an athlete, I feel like, to the team sport parent. Was there any frustration? Was he bummed that you decided skiing was more important than football?
He was pretty silent about it, but I could read that there was maybe potentially a little bit of like, oh, I kind of wanted to go. The thing is, my dad and I were cut from the same cloth where he was a phenomenal football player in high school. He was recruited to go to USC, Notre Dame. He ended up going to Cal and then transferring to San Jose State. But the reason he ended up going to San Jose State was so he could surf in Santa Cruz because he grew up surfing. We had enough similarities where we liked football. We loved those kind of sports, but we were also driven by surfing, by skiing. Like he started to, in college, he started working at Mammoth to be like a lift op and shoveling and whatnot so he could get free tickets and whatnot. So I think for him, he had a chance to go to the NFL. He tried out for the Niners, but he looked back on it and thought that he was focused too much on surfing and not necessarily training as hard as he could have been. So I think he thought like, well, maybe he could do that. Maybe my son could do that. But I think we just still both had the same mentality where it was like surfing and skiing and all those sports are truly what we're attracted to. So I just took the skiing and surfing thing and ran with that as opposed to the football. So he never pressured me. He wasn't like that overly aggressive dad that was like, you need to do this. But I could tell there was a little hint like, he's like, oh, he's not going to play football. I think he could do well. But that was that.
It sounds like you guys weren't full-on jocks where you just played football, but football wasn't everything.
No, it was interesting. In high school, I was kind of the go-betweener kid. So Action sports back in the 90s and early 2000s, especially the 90s, growing up in Santa Cruz, you were not allowed to be a jock. Nowadays, you can wear football jerseys and be a part of a team that could be part of your signature. But back then, it was like you were a surfer, a skater, and not a jock. That was how you differentiated yourself. But I was like a surfer, a skater, and then I played football. I hung out with the surf kids at high school, and I didn't hang out with the jocks, but then I went and played football with them in the afternoon. So it was like a weird go-betweener, and I was just kind of floating in between the crowd. And then I would disappear for the winter. So my nickname in high school at one point became the Ghost, because I would just like show up and then disappear and show up and disappear. And they'd be like, "Where have you been?" I was like, "I've been in Tahoe for the last 4 months." Definitely loved organized sports, and I think I learned a lot from football. I think it teaches you something you can't learn from individual sports, but ultimately was drawn to the pure enjoyment of skiing and surfing, of not having to base your life around winning something, because that's truly what those organized sports are about, is like you dedicate everything so you can beat the other team. And to me, there's almost nothing more gratifying than winning with a team at your side. And football is like going into battle. And when you win a big game and your whole teammate's there and everyone's celebrating, you can never replicate that in individual sports. In individual sports, when you win, you're kind of on an island. You're just on your chair at the top of the mountain by yourself, just like, cool, that was fun. Whereas in football, it is super fun. But to me, I don't know, I guess the competition part of it and the winning part of it didn't draw me in enough. It was more just the freedom, the self-challenge, and just kind of the pure enjoyment of skiing that really took me.
I heard stories of you racing on fat skis and 1080s, and I'm sure the coaches were really appreciative of that.
Yeah, I traded a pair of my slalom skis for a pair of 1080s, my only pair of slalom skis, which was not looked well upon. So I had only a pair of 1080s to race a slalom race with for the last like 2 events of the year, which they were good. I did well. And I'd always bring fat skis, and you're supposed to have your like GS slipping skis and your kind of training skis when you're in between downhill races and whatnot. But I would leave those at home and bring fat skis and get yelled at by my coaches.
What made you decide to leave racing?
I was not as good as I was like when I was younger in a certain way. Like I almost got like worse as I got older. I was training with the Western Region team and doing stuff with the US ski team, but not on the US ski team. And they really like took the love out of it for me, because they were really trying to change me, and they changed like the way I trained and changed the way I skied and all this stuff. It just wasn't fun. It wasn't natural, and I wasn't doing as well. And like I said, it was such a burden on my family financially. And meanwhile, in squash, just like the entire like free skiing revolution is going off, and you're like, why am I stuck on this tiny little corner of Squaw Valley training right now, or having to go to Park City for these training camps and whatnot, and doing stupid dryland stuff when, you know, one of my best friends growing up just did a 1440, and meanwhile, my hero in life, Shane McConkey, is lapping KT, and I'm just like, that's what I want to do, man. That looks way more fun.
Do you chase Shane, Kreitler, and that whole crew around the mountain, and do they eventually figure out who you are?
Yeah, like I literally would tail them like 2 or 3 chairs behind them and just try and follow them around. Remember a day I had a pair of GS skis. This is before my first fat skis, and I bent up the tails with 2 irons so that I had my first pair of twin tips. It was a POW day, and they'd be like ripping turns and skiing lines, and I would just straight line everything because I had such skinny skis on to try and keep up with them. And then eventually, I remember that day, JT came up to me and he was like, dude, you got to get some fat skis. And then asked me like what my name was and all that stuff. And yeah, it's kind of the rest is history. They kind of took me under their wing, especially JT and Kreitler from a pretty young age.
At that point, do you have some ski sponsors? Does your race sponsor carry over into free skiing?
Yeah, I mean, I had Salomon since I was like 16 years old, but they weren't giving me fat skis or anything like that. My first pair of fat skis, I paid $25 for, and there were a pair of Atomic Powder Pluses, and there was a old guy in the old members locker room that had them because fat skis back then were considered old guy skis. And they were my most like cherished possession for so many years.
Did you eventually go to Salomon and say, hey, I'm done with this race thing. I'm not passionate about it anymore, but I am passionate about skiing and I'm going to make something of myself skiing the whole mountain. Hook me up.
Yeah, I actually remember had a conversation with Ted Wardlaw, who was the team manager at the time, and they handled race and free ski. And I just told them the situation. I was like, would you guys mind if I switched over to free skiing? And they were more psyched than I could have ever imagined. They were like, yeah, definitely. That would be awesome, because that was when the revolution was happening. And Salomon was doing really, really well at that time. And then the very next year, I got a check for $2,000 for him. And I was just like, oh my God, you're going to actually give me money to do this now? It was mind blowing to think that you could get paid to go skiing. I've had their support ever since. And it's been a crazy that I've been on them for more than 16 years.
Times are changing at Salomon. They were recently bought by a Chinese corporation. And then they also have the founder of Lululemon involved, which is pretty exciting. When you read that news, what do you think when you have new ownership and it's based in a communist country that gets a lot of flack here in the US? What are your thoughts?
That's a tough one because you don't know exactly what they're going to do. Whether you're bought by a private equity firm, whether you're bought by a big management firm like Amer was, or you're bought by a Chinese company, it all depends on the pudding. The proof is going to be in the pudding. And I'm actually kind of hopeful with this company because they bought Salomon because Salomon is the smallest of the bigs. So the North Faces of the world, the Nikes, the Adidases. Salomon is a big company and it's doing really well, but they're also the smallest of them. What we're thinking and talking to the executives at Salomon, they're like, we think they're going to invest in us to grow around the world and push more Salomon. There's 2 Swedish car companies that were bought by Chinese ownership, Saab and Volvo. Volvo, the company took them and just pumped a ton of money into them. Now Volvo is actually the fastest growing luxury car in the world. It's doing really well. The other company that bought Saab just parted them, took all their patents and just shut them down and essentially took all their technology and they're building it into their own company. So we're hoping that they don't part us like Saab and that they actually push us like Volvo. And then on the country and economic side, I actually got the chance to go to China this last year. We went to the Himalaya and Tibet, and it's definitely different. And it's a scary place only in the fact that I'm worried that that becomes the global economic model because they're so powerful and they can squash dissent, they can squash information, and everyone seems like they're happy for the most part, but it's mainly just because they sequester everyone and there's a lot of propaganda. And my big worry about that is you see other countries and the rise of fascism, the rise of those kind of systems come up that if they get so powerful, then hopefully what we see in the United States doesn't start to mimic what China does. I've been to China also to our factories with my company Arcade, and you talk to the people individually, you talk to the families, and they're doing great. They are what you would picture the 1960s middle America. Good families, clean working environments, so the economy is doing really well. So on an individual level, you see people are doing well and thriving, but then on the macro level, you're kind of like, well, yeah, maybe it's a little bit of ignorance, but this is also a little scary system compared to what we're used to in the US. So ultimately, though, for Salomon, I'm personally hoping that they're just kind of invest in the company.
Does it mean anything having the Lululemon guy involved?
Yeah, that's what I actually heard a lot from the executives there and some of the people high up, that they were really excited by that because growing essentially their soft goods side, their apparel and whatnot, that he is a really smart guy when it comes to that sort of stuff. And in that group, being him a part of it is supposed to be a very active group, and he's supposed to be very actively involved. I don't have that much familiarity with Lululemon other than going to yoga and seeing chicks in tights, but otherwise it seems like they've done pretty well. I think there is excitement on that side.
With Arcade, you've got to find factories, and there's some recon missions, and it sounds like you got some good places, clean factories. Did you see the shitholes, the places that were scary, that were like, we are never going to work in here?
We really didn't. I think they're on the outskirts of some of the major manufacturing towns there. So haven't quite seen that aspect of it. I will say in Tibet, which the company doesn't have any affiliation with, but you do see some of the oppression of the Tibetan people, which is pretty sad. Like this last year, we toured the Potala Palace, which is where the Dalai Lamas for the last 14 centuries have been living and growing, and it's the heart of Buddhism. Now it's a tourist place. You're allowed to walk through it, and we went and saw the current Dalai Lama's childhood room, and he's in India and he's not allowed to be here. And then it's like, here's his house. And you're like, but he's right over there. Like, this is supposed to be his house. It's kind of sad in that regard. It's hard to understand from the outside, but I know for the most part that, they are not doing the greatest things for the Tibetan people.
At this point, I'm going to take a quick break and talk about my sponsors. And my first sponsor is Evo, and they've supported the podcast since day one. If you're a fan of the show, I hope you buy your skis, snowboard, bikes, outerwear, everything from Evo. They're the best retail experience in Denver, Seattle, Portland, and Whistler. And their website, evo.com, features the best prices, an amazing user experience, a no-hassle return policy, and free shipping on orders over $50. If you're in store, let them know you listen to the Powell Movement, and you'll get an additional 10% off. My next sponsor is Rescue Water, and each week I tell you how Rescue Water is proactive recovery. But what does that mean to you? Well, think of it like this. If you're really tired, you skip the coffee and grab an energy drink. Well, if you really need to hydrate, like after you get off the hill, finish a workout, or get home from a big night, make the smart choice and drink a cold Rescue Water. It replaces electrolytes much better than your traditional sports drink. It's a difference I can feel every time. It works. Make it work for you by heading over to rescuewater.com, that's resqwater.com, and save 20% on a 12 or 24-pack case with the code RESQ Water TPM. That's all one word. Rescue Water is also available on Amazon. Those are my sponsors. Who else pays you to ski? You said Salomon, you've got Arcade as a sponsor, but who are the other brands that make your life happen?
Salomon, Swatch has been a long-term sponsor for me and a great partner. Smith, I've been on Smith. There was a little break in between, but I've been Smith since I was like 13.
When you have a break in between, how does that happen? Because you're an athlete for a brand and then they call you up and say, we don't have a contract next year or something like that?
No, I just got an offer that was a little bit better from another company. And I saw at that time where Smith was at, there was no room for me to grow. I was a young guy, still not quite proven, but thought a lot of myself, like a lot of people do. And I thought I could start to work my way up in the team. And I saw some older vets that were on other brands who got cut, get signed on. I'm like, come on, man. So I had another offer and I took it. And then realized I was like, well, this kind of sucks. Smith was actually really good. The products were really good. And then I ended up calling one day and I was like, hey, I just want to see what you guys up to. They're like, if you want back, you're on. I was like, all right, cool. And now, it's been another 8-9 years since that. And they're a super great partner.
That's lucky on your part because sometimes when you leave a brand for a competitor, they don't want to take you back right away because they're almost like, fuck you, dude. We helped grow you and now you're just going to leave and go somewhere else.
Yeah, totally. And I had some support at the higher levels. And I think that's what some of the lower levels of that hadn't changed. And they were like, yes, we want you back. And yeah, I know I definitely got lucky on that. I would not advise any athlete to leave a brand and then try and come back, knock on their doors. Usually doesn't work out so well. Luckily, it did for me. I think I was still kind of like not on the radar quite big enough and didn't have a ton of exposure with the other brand. So it was kind of like,
you hadn't been branded them yet.
Yeah, exactly. If all of a sudden you're like the guy there and then come back, it's a little weird. But Hester Gloves, Mammut, North America, I just signed with for like hard goods, like ropes and carabiners and Navi backpacks and avalanche safety gear. Squaw Valley is a sponsor of mine. They've been a good supporter of me. And I support them just because this is my favorite mountain in the world. And Arcade being a co-founder of it. And I'm, I guess, an athlete and representative of the company, but it's also mainly just like I'm an owner of the company and it's part of my life these days. I'm kind of blanking right now. Sometimes I always have to look at what?
Is there no energy sponsor for you?
No, I've never had an energy drink sponsor. I talked to Red Bull and they told me I was too old.
Interesting, because that's one sponsor that people use as a cash cow. I look at someone, if they're wearing a Red Bull hat or a Monster hat, I look at them as they probably don't have too many issues with their career at that point, because if they have that, that'll probably pay their rent and bills, and then the other sponsorships can pay for the rest of the stuff for them.
Yeah.
So you talked to Red Bull, you're too old. How old were you when you talked to him?
That was just around 2013, so I was like 30. So I'd been started to get established, been in Matchstick for a few years. That was when they were releasing Days of My Youth, and I just kind of started to talk to them, and they were kind of supporting me in certain sorts of ways. Just a little bit of financial help. I was like, can we make this more of an official thing? And they're like, hey, you're too old, you're too established. And for me, honestly, I just don't really care for many energy drinks as a whole, that it was Red Bull or nothing for me, because Red Bull, beyond the energy drink, offers so much other support, whether that's media support, health insurance, like rehab.
They give people health insurance?
Yeah.
Wow.
And, Johnny Collinson, who just blew his knee and spends all his time with some of the best physical trainers in the world in LA the whole summer to get back and ready for the season. So they offer a lot for an athlete and athlete support, stuff that other companies don't, that just cash, I don't know, doesn't really do it to me. Just kind of always looked at like the monsters and the rock stars and all that stuff. I was like, I don't know, it's just not me. It's not who I want to represent.
If someone called you up and said, hey, we got 75 grand, we want you to be on the program next year, do you have to think about it then?
I would think about it, but I'd probably still say no, because that's one of the things, like Swatch has been a really, really good partner. And I kind of tell people like that's my energy drink. Swatch was the original Red Bull. Before Red Bull came along, they were sponsoring action sports athletes, sponsoring events. You look at all these old photos of Shane in like an extreme skiing, it's like Swatch across the cover.
Swatch and Bud Light.
Totally, exactly. Swatch was a sponsor of Blizzard of Oz, like they were the original action sports brands and supporting athletes. And so then they kind of lost their way a little bit and then started coming back to it. And I was lucky enough to kind of meet them early on in my career, and they started supporting me early on. And they've just been such an awesome supporter of action sports, of myself and my own projects, that I just don't see any reason to kind of leave them. They're my energy drink sponsor.
Fair enough.
The other ones that it allows me to do, like Yeti is a new sponsor of mine as well. And they offer something completely different, and they're huge in content marketing. So I've never really felt like I needed that energy drink sponsor.
You need to make money as a pro, and that's kind of why I was asking about energy drinks. But for you, it's not only skiing for you. It's all about having a following these days and building it. And you're really good at social media. I see all the skiers out there, and you seem to do a pretty good job of it. Sometimes you're a little bit more on it than other times, but you're definitely on it. And is that something that you have to tell yourself every day, I have to do social media? Because I wouldn't think it's something that you like doing, like, hey, look at me. Hey, look at me.
Yeah, 100%. I've always kind of focused on the business side of the back end, because early in my career, I realized like I wasn't kind of breaking out, and I was like, well, I got to do something to prove myself to these brands that I was working for. So I started to work more on the business side of things, of like learning what they're doing, learning what a value an athlete is. I remember early in my career, I would send wrap-up emails with photos and a video edit from it, and I would get team managers writing back like, oh my God, we need this from all of our athletes. This is amazing. So I always kind of focused on making sure that I was like at least going to continue my support, even if I wasn't necessarily performing at the highest level or got injured that year or something. But then it was, I don't know how many years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, when I was going to team meetings and realizing everyone keeps talking about social media. I've had 3 meetings in a row with different brands, and they're all talking about social media. And by that point, I was like a casual user of it. And I was like, I guess I should focus on this. I don't know why yet, but I'm going to focus on this. So I made a pact with myself. I was like, post every day. Just that's what you're going to start doing. And so I started posting every day. And then I just, was kind of real and authentic about it, trying not to do anything cliche or be overly promotional or anything. I was just like, I'm just going to post, and saw my following grow. And then what I realized was this is giving me a lot of freedom. Like, hey, it's my dog, Theo. The freedom it gave me was that back in the day, you had 2 people controlling your entire career. And that was like the photo editor at Powder Magazine and the video editor for the video company you're working for. So MSP, TGR, level 1. And essentially your destiny was controlled by them. And your sponsors can help out in certain ways, but there wasn't many avenues of distribution. With social media, all of a sudden I realized I'm my own distribution platform, and I don't necessarily have to go with MSP on this trip and film with them all season. I can do something that is unique to me and exactly what I want to do. And my sponsors are going to be stoked because I'm distributing it, have a large following, and just doing like direct to the audience right in time. And I noticed all the sponsors were really fired up on that. So it kind of started realizing to me like, yeah, this is extra work, but this is actually extra freedom as well. And then it's afforded me more opportunities like what I'm doing now. Like you can prove to people like, hey, I'm good at putting media out there, putting myself out there, and creating content for people straight from myself, straight to them. And I don't have to go through a print magazine or a once yearly video release.
Speaking of your time on social and digital, do you have the screen time app on your phone?
Yeah, I do.
How much screen time do you get in a day?
I don't want to admit. It's like you look at that pops up on your Sunday and you're like, oh God, this is terrible. This is really bad. But I guess it also depends. And then you kind of look at what you're doing. And I will say, luckily, it's not like Instagram is my first thing on there, which is good because I think that's kind of the most thinly veiled social media app. I do a lot of reading of articles in Twitter more than anything. But yeah, it is crazy how it's taken over. I did say this year, I turned my phone off for a week, and it's crazy to kind of go back to it and realize the moments you have in between where you're just kind of sitting there and looking out at the view and going, thinking. I'm just thinking right now. Not like just digesting content, but I'm a pretty rabid digester of content. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I don't know. I guess there's good and bad things about it. Definitely screen addiction seems like it's going to be more and more of a thing and more of a problem. But there's also things about it like networking, meeting people that have become important in your life and your career and stuff that you wouldn't get a chance to meet without social media.
And when you post a video online, how many people are seeing it? Like in the first week, how many downloads on episode 4 of the 50 Project? How many people saw it?
We're getting around like 25,000 views on YouTube is kind of what I'm averaging right now, which is pretty good, especially considering they're coming out weekly. They're on the longer side. They're not an Instagram little hit of, my best Instagram video I've ever put was 4 seconds. That's like kind of new media. It's 4 seconds long. You get 200,000 views. Everyone's all fired up. You're like, yeah, but what does that actually do? So for these longer videos, like 8 to 15 minutes long, getting 25,000 views, especially where I'm at right now, which is like I'm producing this thing entirely myself, marketing myself. I'm editing all the teasers and delivering all the content to sponsors and whatnot. I have an editor for the actual stories, but very overwhelmed with how much work is going on with it. So I'm actually exceeding the numbers that I pitched out there when I was pitching the project. So right now it's doing pretty well. Like I think episode 2 has 40,000 views, and our 16-minute long episode 5, has got 20,000 views right now. So it's good. I think we're hitting a core ski audience right now, and hopefully build upon that as the years go on.
Being a pro skier who now has been in the top of the pro skiing food chain, I feel like for a good 6-8 years you've been up there. Is it something where you get recognized places? Are you a ski town famous, or does it happen elsewhere?
That's what I tell people. I'm super famous in a really small world. So yeah, you go to Squaw and you're just like, you can see heads turn and pro call outs and all that kind of stuff. You go into Little Cottonwood Canyon and people are coming up to you left and right. But then you go to an airport and you walk through an airport and no one says anything. Although occasionally I've been getting more and more just random people coming up to you. But it's like famous in a very small world.
Is it weird?
Yeah, definitely is weird. I never kind of expected it. I think honestly, being really famous would be horrible.
Yeah.
Like, I think it would absolutely suck. Where if you're Brad Pitt walking down the street and every single person is looking at you and wanting to say something to you, it's like, oh my God, that would be miserable. Like, people that want to be famous and like actively pursue it, like Kardashians and Paris Hiltons and all that stuff, you're like, you guys have something wrong with you, because that is not a fun life to live.
I would like to have their money, but not their fame.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, no, being rich and not famous is way better than being poor and famous.
Have you felt recently in the past few years in print media and media in general, it's more about the adventure than the gnarly skier? And have you ever felt squeezed out where there's some stories that you could be into, but it might be too gnarly, Cody, and we'd rather tell the story of this trip to wherever?
I wouldn't say I feel personally squeezed out. I would say there's been some shifts where they're trying to tell the stories of some underground local dude that is, 65 and been skiing on first chair every day or whatever. And the one thing that it doesn't do for me is create the heroes that they did back in the day, where it was like back in the day, it was about Seth Morris and it was about Scott Schmidt. These were these icons of the sport that you wanted to know, and they would do an expose on McConkey and you just like digest every single word. And to me, like, those are the days when we created these heroes that were the icons of our sport and that truly led the sport and pulled people along with them. The only reason I am a pro skier is because of Shane. Like, I grew up in a surf town, and while I wasn't good enough to be a pro surfer, I had a lot of friends that were pro surfers, but I didn't like the culture. I saw Shane, and he looked like he was having more fun than any other person on this planet. And I could paddle out into my local break and with the pros, and they're all serious and aggro and alpha male. I'm like, what the hell? So when the media is kind of following and creating these heroes, it feels like they're creating the sport. Whereas like, when there's kind of these underground ski bum stories, as much as they do deserve credit for where they are, it doesn't quite inspire me when I was young like it did a story about Shane.
No, I see that. I only bring that up because I actually had a conversation, I won't name the person's name, but someone in ski media, and we were talking about what needs to change in media, and they didn't really like my opinion of wanting to see more pros in it, and I actually got an email saying like, yeah, well, all you want to do is jerk off to Cody Townsend, and we're writing a story of traveling to and I said no. Whoever was doing it was writing the story with no pros, and I kind of came back and I was like, no, it's not that I'm jerking off to Cody Townsend, I've never jerked off to you, just letting you know that.
I have.
Okay, well, that's a weird thing. I feel like with podcasting and listening to myself all the time, that's what I'm doing.
I'm a pro athlete, man. That's what we're supposed to do, right? We're very self-obsessed.
But I came back with the story I want to hear is Cody Townsend going to like, yeah, I want to see the culture story too, but I need the pro in there to create the hero like you're talking about.
One of the big things I thought was a big part of where the magazines could be is that the downside of social media is we craft who we are. So you can kind of put whatever you want. And we have seen the rise of people that we kind of are exposed as fake, but are pros, but they're like not really. They just craft who they are through this imagery that they get to put up there. So the print and journalism in general can get to the heart of that story, like to truly understand it. Like I really, really love Powder's story on Sean Pettit because it was really in depth. It really showed who Pettit was. And I think that was where I was talking to some people in media and being like, look, you have the opportunity to tell the true story. Tell the story that people know and see in their social media feeds, but truly don't know because they're just crafting their own imagery. So I was definitely kind of an advocate for that. Is like, tell the real story, the story behind, kind of do what you do in a certain way with podcasts, but do it in print media.
In your career, you're at a point where you own a home. You have a wife who is also a professional skier. You guys are both, like I said, in the top of the food chain of the ski industry in respective male and female parts because they're treated differently, unfortunately. But in terms of economics and your future, you've got a brand in arcade, so there's a fallback plan when you get through skiing. But arcade, is that something that's going to set you up for life? And when I say life, I'm not saying are you going to be rich or anything like that, but is it something where you don't have to get a job once you finish skiing?
I don't know. I hope so. That's why I was trying to create some plan A's and plan B's and plan C's because Parker White once said, and I thought it was very accurate, is like I'm one knee surgery away from being a janitor. And I'm like, I don't want to necessarily do that. I originally always saw when I was trying to be a pro skier, I was like, if I can just do this and do it for a couple of years and make a matchstick movie, I'm good. Everything else from that, if it comes, great. But I always kind of envisioned to do this till I was like 28 or something and then just go get a real job. So I got a college education because I knew that that's a good fallback plan. And then it just kind of kept going. And I was like, well, if I continue to work hard at this, I can keep going with it. And if I can work on the business side of it, then I can potentially have avenues to work inside an industry I want to work in after it. So where I've got to, where like I was able to buy a house off of skiing, that is still to me ridiculous.
How far do you live from Squaw Valley, the mountain proper?
About 15 minutes. I live in Tahoe City. I got what they call the realtors a filtered lake view. So you can see through the trees a little bit. You can go, there's a lake. In California, buying a home is not cheap.
It's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, I went pretty much dead broke to actually buy it after saving up a lot of money and had to convince sponsors, can you pay me early so I can get my first mortgage payment in? Because I didn't want to default on my loan on month one. But, I never thought that wasn't in the cards for me. It's been pretty fortunate, I realize, in that regard to being able to buy a house off of skiing. And luckily I have good sponsors. Salomon has been very loyal to a lot of their guys, Douglas, Akai, Zackerson. They evolve their careers, but I see a path with them that I could probably go on for as long as I want, really. And that is something that's pretty cool.
Unless the Chinese have something to say about it.
Yeah, maybe they'll cut me. Maybe after this podcast, I listen to it and I'll be like, no, that guy's done. But, luckily I do have arcade. That's the one fortunate thing about being a pro skier is like, I actually have 6 months off. And so in that time, you're like, would I just waste it mountain biking or try and create something else? And, I had a roommate at the time that we'd talk about businesses. He actually was a bartender around here, but he was a coach. And then he's a really smart guy and really into the ski industry. And he was like on the final list to get hired for a pretty good job at Armada. And they said no. And he was kind of like, all right, that was the catalyst to like, let's start this thing we've been talking about for the last 6 months, which is realizing we were like, wait, belts are something that suck when you ski. And they're something that doesn't quite work. And yet everything else you buy for skiing has a purpose and is like specialty. And so we're like, let's make this. And we had an inspiration from a Grundens belt. And we're like, let's redesign this Grundens fishing waders belt for essentially skiing. And that was the very first catalyst of it all.
Was it Matt Jackson that was?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So
because he's running Grundens now, right?
Totally.
That's like a family business for him.
For sure. No, he's running Grundens and he was living here and he passed him out. And right off the bat, we're like, these things are awesome. Grundens are fishing belts. So we actually went to Matt right off the bat and we're like, hey, we're thinking of doing this. And we said, can we like partner with you guys or, create this other company using your guys' design? And Matt was like, no. And then we tried to talk to his dad as well, who was running the company, Michael Jackson.
No way.
Then they were like, no. And so we're like, all right, well, we're going to do it on our own. And then we spent the next year trying to find sourcing and trying to find the right materials. And funny enough, like back to the China thing, we tried to source it out of the USA, and the manufacturing in the USA is not very good, which is one of the dirty secrets of it, is that in the textile industry, we were finding completely inferior products to the Chinese products. So we were trying to get them to made in the USA, and the costs are actually about the same when you actually factor in everything like tariffs and shipping and whatnot. But we found better quality overseas, which was a huge decision point in the company. It's like, do we go with quality made in a place that's not going to be looked well upon, or do we make it less quality but made in the USA? And I know that's probably pissed people off, but that was what we found. And we dwelled over this decision for months and months and months. We just couldn't find manufacturers in the US that would make a good product. So then, we made the product, sold 500 of them at one shop in Porter's in 7 weeks. And we were like, whoa, they sold out. And because we made 500, we put in like $5,000 and they sold out, and we're like, maybe we have something. And then it's kind of snowballed from there.
Now I'm going to take a final sponsor break. And Spy Optic is celebrating its 25th anniversary. Yes, 25 years Spy has been crushing it with innovation and style. Based out of Southern California, Spy is a collective of athletes, artists, and product designers who live and breathe action sports. To celebrate this 25th anniversary, Spy is re-releasing some iconic shades. Jeremy McGrath's MC3, Dale Jr.'s Dirty Mo, and the timeless Scoop 2. They are badass and they are back. To get 20% off your Spy purchase, head on over to spyoptic.com, place your order, and then at checkout, enter the code TPM20, that's all one word, and note that this discount does not apply for the game-changing Ace EC goggle. To find out more about the products and the brand, head on over to spyoptic.com. My final sponsor is the 10 Barrel Brewery out of Bend, Oregon. They have been brewing the Northwest's best beer since 2006, and they encourage everyone to go drink some of their beer outside. Why? Because 10 Barrel is all about the outside. They live and breathe the snow and bike lifestyle and support it with events, like the final Hella Big Air event of the season. The next one is coming up April 6th at Sierra at Tahoe. If you're anywhere near, these are events you are not going to want to miss. Next time you're at the store, pick up some 10 Barrel. And to find out more about the beer that supports action sports, the events, and their pubs, head on over to 10barrel.com. Those are my sponsors, and now we'll get back into the podcast. When we started talking a little over 2 years ago, Arcade had been in business for 8 years at that point. It's almost a decade, maybe a decade now.
We're in our 9th year right now.
2 years ago, it was growing. How's the growth since? Because I think back then you might have had 3 or 4 employees, and things were great. And what does the company look like now?
So we have 10 employees now. We are based right across the street from where we're sitting in Squaw Valley. We're right at the post office. So we have an amazing place for employees that you're just staring at Squaw, or if they want to go ski for a couple hours and come back in, there's like full open door policy. Just go ski, just show up whenever. So we're growing really well. And I would say in a sustainable way, not hyper growth, because most of the things I've learned from business is most businesses die of indigestion, not starvation. Growth kills companies quicker than not growing. So we've paced ourselves. And although we're 9 years in, it's because we didn't really know what we were doing in the beginning, and we've been learning along the way. And we're turning into a legit, real company. We have boards, we have board meetings, shareholders. We are a real company. And I still think about it. I'm like, man, like all these employees, like they work for us and we put a roof over their head. Like they rely on us to keep it going. That is a big factor when you really feel connected to the community, to these employees that are local. You're like, we got to make this so it's sustainable, so we don't have to fire all these people one day, which we don't want to do. So it's been going really good. I mean, like any business, there's challenges, and we've been able to navigate them pretty well.
Anybody ripping you off and making your same product?
So many people. The worst one right now is, I'd say, is Decine. Decine has ripped us off, and we've tried contacting them, tried to put it like, dude, what the hell are you guys doing? They just won't even respond. We've learned more that's their kind of business model, so I don't look friendly upon Decine anymore. They just straight ripped us off. A few other ones, Spacecraft, they at least tried to make it a little different, but it's pretty much the same. There's tons of little startup ones that have tried to pop up here, mainly in Utah. We've had like 4 rip-off companies in Utah, but we've always said it's like a thing when these competition pops up. Yeah, everyone says it's like gratifying, like imitations, it's a serious form of flattery. You're like, yeah, great, but you're like, screw you.
It still pisses you off.
Yeah, totally. Like, screw you, man. Like, you're like taking bread off our table, off our employees' table, from no design of your own, no thought of your own. You just like literally look at us and then you're like, they're doing well, let's rip them off. But what it does for us is like, do better. That's our thing, is like, we can try to fight them and get in petty like social media fights or something like that and call them out, but
that only hurts you.
It only hurts us. And so we just get better. So we innovate faster. Like the thing is with a Decine, it's probably some random designer that was like trying to meet his bottom line, or like, oh, I got this. And executive probably doesn't know that this is a ripoff, probably doesn't hear of us. He's worried about the bottom line. And then it all of a sudden is in their catalog. But the thing is, like, they ripped us off. We are pushing it. We are the ones that are 100% focused on belts. We will make the best belts. Decine does a ton of stuff. Backpacks, gloves, clothing, they do everything. So the last thing they're going to think about truly is belts. They're just only going to do what we did 2 years ago. So it does push us to be better, to do better, to have better relationships with our customers, with our athletes, with everyone. So it's just part of it. I've learned that that's part of business, and you just kind of roll with it.
When you see people imitating you and it's kind of frustrating, when you started and you guys were looking at Grundon, and it's kind of a similar thing, and Matt and his dad said no, what's the relationship now? Because he's still like a squaw bro when he comes into town, and is it friendly?
Yeah, there was, I think, a little tension early on, and especially locally, people think we thought we were ripping off, but we're like, we just didn't tell them. Like, we reached out to Matt, we reached out to Michael. We're trying to do something with them. So we had this idea. They said no to us. So we always felt like we had our bases covered of being like, they said no. We repurposed what was an original design. After year 1, which was very close, year 2, we already changed it. Year 3, and like it's now not even resembling it. The only thing that was close was that it was a stretchy belt, essentially, which is something you can't patent. And stretchy belts have been around for a while. So we just kind of repurposed that idea and made it better for skiing. So, yeah, I think there was some tensions at first, but then, you know, I've talked with Matt here and there, and he's very supportive. And now that he's running the company, Grundon's, he is like just fully in it. And I know how overwhelmed he is. So I know he's actually like, yeah, you guys grew a company out of nothing. Like, good job, because it is not easy running a company.
Nice. And he's an awesome guy.
Yeah, Matt's a super nice guy. I really like him.
Around 2005 is when you were given a huge opportunity to film with Scott Gaffney. And that could have been your big break. It was a big part with MXP, the hit list. And your part in that movie was phenomenal.
Yeah, it was very phenomenal. It was so good that you blacked out and forgot that it ever even happened. That was awesome. I actually showed up to the premiere and realized that I'm not in this movie, even though I spent the entire year filming with them. I was in the bonus segment, along with a few of my ton of crashes of the year. I just skied terribly. I realized that year that skiing for the camera is a lot different than just ripping the mountain with your friends, and realized that your style is something that is very important that you don't focus on when you're just skiing around the resort with your buddies. God, I remember going to Shane McConkey's house and we were watching raw footage from the season. It's like from half the season, we got it all on a VHS tape and there's no music. So it's like pretty boring to watch. And you just put it in the VCR and start playing it. And I just remember watching myself ski and wanting to cry because it was so bad. I just was like, maybe I'm not going to be a pro skier because like I suck.
I would think you go home after that and you totally question yourself and you're like, what am I doing with my life? I wasn't able to make the movie. I was given the opportunity. It was all there handed to me and I didn't make it happen. And then you have to figure out what's next or how you're going to channel your efforts into becoming a pro skier or finding another path as well to make sure that you can cover yourself. And I think you were in school the whole time, but that's right around when you were finishing up school.
Yeah, I do remember going home at the time and like my girlfriend, who's now my wife, Elise, just telling me, it's just like, no, you're going to have a great year. You're going to go back out there, just kind of boosting me up because, I was really down at that moment going like, yeah, this is my dream. It's been my dream since I was like 6 years old, since I watched Scott Schmidt movies and like just was like, oh my God, I want to be a skier and I already quit that ski racing thing. So I can't go back to that. And now I got this free skiing thing. And then I wouldn't know how to be a pro skier after that. The very next year, I almost kind of just relaxed, I didn't worry about I'm going to make it in Matchstick. And I ended up getting an opportunity with Wink Inc., the film production company that's now gone out of Jackson Hole, and had an amazing year and arrived in a certain way because I know Powder Magazine guys really took notice. I remember Derek Taylor telling me, he's like, oh man, you were so close to winning Breakthrough Performer. But it was also when, one of the greatest skiers in our sport, Ian McIntosh, showed up on the scene and he stole that away from me. Which is fine. I'm totally cool with losing to Ian.
Speaking of losing to Ian, you were on the Freeride World Tour back in the early part of your career. When you were on it, it seemed like a different event, but it seems to be getting better every year. What do you think of Tanner being on the Freeride World Tour?
I think it's awesome. It's cool when guys like Henrik, when he came on, when Candide came on, when Tanner came on, it's like putting their skills in what is truly one of the hardest avenues to compete in freeriding. I mean, you're sending in less than ideal conditions against a lot of really good skiers, really willing to throw down. I thought it was super awesome, and I thought he was doing really, really well. It was a bummer he fell in the last two, but I mean, I watched every single one of his runs, and I thought it brought a lot of attention to the Freeride World Tour and the sport, and I truly think, the skiing on the level that they're doing on the Freeride World Tour is so high. I know when I came off of it, I actually was at the Verbier Extreme, did the contest, ended up getting postponed, long story, but I ended up going to Alaska right after doing Verbier Extreme. And I went to Alaska and I was like, this is so easy. There is powder everywhere. There's not rocks everywhere. If I fall, I'm just going to fall on powder. I remember sitting with Henrik and I'm like, this is awesome, dude. You can send and you'll be fine. And was like fully sending. It like prepared me for film skiing like nothing else could, which is what I took about it when I first started doing it, which I didn't really have anyone to film with. And I was like kind of lost as what to do. And Elise was competing at that time. And I was like, I guess I'll go compete. And I did the Mammoth qualifiers in year one. And I ended up winning the qualifiers. It was my first competition ever. And I was against all like the free ski world tour athletes and whatnot. And I was like, oh, maybe I can do this. And took it as an opportunity to learn and get better and ski with guys like Kai Zackerson, who are just on the top of their game, ski with guys like Henrik and Candide, and truly learn in these environments and learn how to huck a 50-foot cliff and stomp on hardback, which is pretty hard to do. And like all of a sudden you get to powder and you're like, this is cake. I'll go throw a backflip. I land on my head, I'm fine. Whereas Freeride World Tour, it doesn't quite work out that way.
Yeah, true. So you get your second chance at filming around that point. Does Gaffney come back to you and be like, hey man, you sucked in 2005, but I've watched you in video parts since then and that was just a bad year?
It was a little different than that. It was actually more along the lines of Mark Yama blew his knee out right before this trip up to Alaska. That was part Salomon free ski TV trip and part MSP trip. So Salomon was going to pay for the whole trip and he blew his knee out. And I was actually over in Europe at the Verbier Extreme and they called me and they're like, do you want to go? And I was like, well, yeah, duh. But I know at that point, like Gaffney was probably in the background going like, yeah, like, let's go. But it was really Steve and Murray making the call on that. I know they fought against having me on the trip. I think they still had visions of 2005 and me eating shit. And they were trying to get Pettit on the trip instead of me and instead of another Salomon skier. Salomon was like, no, we're not going to pay for a trip and have Pettit go. He rides for K2.
Makes no sense.
Yeah. And then I think they finally bended to the wishes of Salomon, and Murray and Steve allowed me to go, and it ended up being as good of a trip as I probably ever could have in Alaska.
And you were part of the crew ever since?
Yeah, essentially that. They were like, oh, you learned how to ski in those last 5 years. So I've been kind of filming with them ever since.
You won an award in 2010 for Best Ski Segment, so that had to be pretty rewarding.
Yeah, Henrik and I got closing segment. It was a rad segment, which upped for a rad movie, and the way I see it, I knew that was the year.
I believe in one of your film segments, you took an 80-footer to a rock.
Oh, yeah, God. 2011, the very next year. I was skiing like after the segment and the way I see it. And just that next year, I was just skiing like super, super strong and just felt like so on top of it. Like I could land anything. And went on a trip with Bushy and Henrik up to Terrace. And we didn't get to ski that much, but when we did, the conditions were really good. And I was kind of on a roll, it felt like. And I just spotted this cliff that looked huge and had a good tranny. And as Hugo Harrison taught me back in the days, like overhung cliffs always have bad trannies and underhung cliffs always have good trannies at good steep landings. So you're kind of like, the more underhung it is, the more it sticks out, the better. And this cliff stuck out just a little too far. And I kind of didn't really scope it well enough because I was just overconfident. I was just like, no, I got it. And ended up being, there was kind of this rock that stuck out from the face that when you were looking straight on just looked like part of the cliff, but it was actually like extended away from the cliff. And yeah, I hucked to the air, and as soon as I came off, just realized it was like, oh shit, I'm landing right on rocks. It was like 65 feet to the rock for an 80-foot cliff, and I was very lucky. If I landed like on my back or any which way other than like super strong squarely on my feet, probably wouldn't be here talking to you right now.
There's a ton of risk in what you do, and it's nice that you walked away from that one. You might not have walked away right away, but you were able to walk away at some point. And there's been other injuries that you've had too.
Yeah, well, I destroyed my knee then. ACL, MCL, meniscus, and tibia plateau fracture. And then 2 years later, up in Alaska, filming for Days of My Youth, just in the typical stupid thing, kind of midday, like we're not really filming, but we're kind of testing stuff, and just this like little spine with a little 360 air into it. I was like, just whatever. It's probably not a shot, but I'm going to do it because it'll be fun. And just kind of get warmed up for it, and spun and ended up landing in a really weird hole, and tore my PCL, separated some ribs, and just was like, fuck, down this road again.
Speaking of Days of My Youth, the line, they call it the crack, was something that got you more notoriety than you could possibly ever imagine, and really not just put you on the map, but made you the North Star of skiing for a full season.
Yeah, that was crazy. I didn't really expect that to happen. We were spending a lot of time filming for Days of My Youth. We knew it was like going to be a big Red Bull movie and whatnot, and came across the crack. And I'd been looking for something like that for like 5 years. I'd skied this line called Terminal Cancer up in the Ruby Mountains in Nevada. And it's this big, long couloir. And I rode it a few times, and I rode it with Jeremy Jones. And we kind of decided to really ski it fast, as opposed to, I'd say 99% of people, you just kind of hop turn down it because it's narrow. It's like 5-6 feet wide. And we decided to like flash it and just try and make like GS turns down it. And I remember getting to the bottom of that, just going like, oh my God, that was so fun. Like it felt like you're in a Star Wars scene, just things flying by you. And ever since then, I was like, I got to find like the man version of that. I want to find that ultimate couloir in Alaska that's just huge and steep. And coming across the crack, that was like next level. I couldn't even imagine something like that existed in the mountains. It's like one of the most mind-blowing features I've ever seen.
Mind-blowing feature, and there's no room for error in there. I mean, it's 5-6 feet wide at max, and you're going, 70 miles an hour down this crack with rock walls on both sides, and there's no margin for error there.
No, it was actually one of the first lines I've ever gotten more scared in, as opposed to before, because before you're usually kind of the most nervous, and you drop in and it all kind of goes like into your like Zen focused state, and you're just almost relaxed. And it was the first time I was really relaxed up top, and I could tell everyone else was really nervous, which was kind of tripped me out. Like Gaffney was like, "All right, bro, you got this. Come on, come on." I'm like, dude, you kind of tripped me out because you generally just joke around with me and make fun of me before I drop in. But I was really relaxed and I dropped in, and then I kind of started getting into it. And all of a sudden I was realizing, I was like, holy shit, this is sketchy. Like there's no exit, there's no stopping, there's nothing. You are fully committed to this, and there's one exit, and you got to go really fast because you got slough on your tail, and the snow is kind of shitty, and there's just like all these undulations in the snow. And yeah, it was wild. That's why I kind of like lost my mind at the end of it. Just like coming out of that, it's just like, wow, holy shit, that really just happened. Like I made it through that whole thing.
I know there was a reaction from Travis Rice because he had hit that line a couple weeks earlier, but then I heard even later that maybe Nobis or someone else might have hit that line even before you and Travis.
Yeah. So all of a sudden it comes out that like Trans World Snowboarding had published a photo of him in there. And then there was all this cry from like the snowboard industry, like Travis Rice hit it first. And then it started to turn into this like skier snowboarder thing. And then Travis called me and it was like, dude, let's try and bury this. He's like, Trans World Snowboarding, they want to interview me and like throw you under the bus kind of. And he's like, I'm not about that. He's like, at first I was like bummed, but then I realized it's such a rad feature and I've really respected your riding. And so let's just talk about it. And I've always respected Travis, but for that, gained more respect for him. But then in the middle of that, all this internet bullshit and random people online saying like, fuck snowboarders, fuck skiers, fuck that guy. It was just like such bullshit. And then it comes out that they're like, Novus is like, yeah, me and John Hunt wrapped into that and skied it. And so it was like, perfect. Like, the rest. Like, it wasn't about who did it first. Like, to me, like, I had no idea that someone had dropped in before me, much less like a Novus even years before. So it was first to me. And having the thought of someone else doing it definitely wasn't in my mind.
That was an amazing line, and everywhere you looked, there was Cody Townsend on the Good Morning America show. USA Today has articles. You're everywhere, and that's huge. And then the next year you go into a movie, I believe you produced it yourself, and it's Conquering the Useless. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was.
I watched that movie. It seemed like you put money and budget into a production where you ended up going deep, deep out into the wilderness, and then you got really sick.
Yes.
It really affected everything you did. It was like, hey, Cody goes skiing. Cody gets sick. And then Dan Treadway decides he doesn't want to ski hard anymore. Dave Treadway.
Dave. Yeah, the long and short of it. I guess one of the biggest things about it was all that hoopla that happened from the crack. It was kind of like this, it wasn't an awakening, but because I'd known it before. But the one thing about like ski movies and just like the ski porns of like TGR and MSP and Level 1 is it's really reliant on the skier stepping it up year after year.
For sure.
You just kind of have to do better than you did the year before. And there's only like two things. It's like you either the cameramen get better cameras or the skiers step it up. And generally you see disappointing movies are from like a bad snow year where no one stepped it up. And it just, I remember just getting to this point of like after the crack and after that season, and I won all these awards and like, I'm like, I can't top that. I spent 2 years working on that and I can't go into next year and just try to top that. It's going to be 100% letdown no matter what. And it was like, I didn't have any desire to go out and try to top it. And I knew at that point, parts of the thing were becoming a job. And it was just getting to the point it was getting a little monotonous. And I wanted to like switch it up. And I just knew that climbing lines is something I'd never done before. Going on a trip where you're winter camping and like kind of guiding yourself and just with your friends was really like a big step away from the norms of helicopters and guides and big production. I just kind of wanted to, try something else out.
I figure that 2014 year, you probably have never seen as much exposure for yourself, and it's got to eventually get to you. And then you want to switch and do what you want to do. And the risk that you're putting yourself through, I think throughout your whole career, at some point you get to an age where you're like, is it worth it anymore, this risk? I'm putting words into your mouth. I don't know if that's true or not, but I would think once you hit about 30, you kind of question that after you've hit your 100th ginormous cliff. What are you thinking?
I lost a lot of friends in this sport, especially in squaw, but just in the ski community in general. It's around like 20 friends I've lost to skiing or related to skiing. And it's ridiculous. And then, after the crack and after all that, it was just like, there is parts of it that you're like, is this really worth it? Like, I've got a wife and when I have a family and I don't want to die doing this, change from being like 20 years old and you're like, yeah, I'd die for the sport, whatever, because you're gung ho and you see the bigger picture of all the pain that it creates for people. And that affected me for sure. Like there's just from Shane's death to Timmy's death to just everyone that was around us, like going, it was like, I just knew that it was like, if I keep going down this path of trying to push it and trying to progress myself in one realm, it's like the margin for error is going to get slimmer and slimmer. And I don't want to die.
The next project on your list is Matchstick Ruin and Rose, and I've made my opinion pretty clear on this movie a lot. I didn't like it. The athlete segments that came out afterwards, they're great. But when I go see a Matchstick movie, I don't go for a storyline. I go for just ski porn and fast, heavy music, and, that's what I want to see, and I want to laugh a little bit. As an athlete, what are your thoughts on the movie overall?
My thoughts were I liked that they were willing to experiment. I think there was a little bit of a phase in ski movies where it's kind of like, what do we do? Do we keep just churning out the same ski porn every year? And that's really reliant on the athletes like progressing every year and doing cool, rad shit every year.
Yes.
But at the same time, that's getting harder and harder as an athlete. I know in the years prior to that, you go to your big Alaska trip and it's crap conditions. You spend 20 grand on this heli trip and you get nothing. And you put together a part that you're like hucking 10-foot cliffs and everyone's like, wah, wah. And you're like, well, I put my whole season on that and it's not working out. And I wasn't able to huck an 80-foot backflip like Seth did in the year before. Like, you just can't. So it was just getting harder and harder to progress the sport and to do new rad stuff. So I think going out on a limb was the right thing to do at the time. I personally actually kind of liked the movie, but it was just maybe because it was so different. I totally realized how it didn't work out as a ski tour movie, though, because you walked out of there generally more bummed, thinking like about climate change and all these horrible stories that could happen. I kind of liked it because it did make me think, and it gave me a sense of like, shit, that's what climate change could look like. And it really brought me into that realm. And I think Ben is a talented filmmaker. Just didn't work for the audience that Matchstick has built up over the years. So I get the criticism. I kind of liked it. And I thought the cinematography was great. It was just...
Yeah, it was just, to me, I don't want to think when I leave a ski
movie. For sure. And I get that. And that's where I think ski movies will continue to do well just doing ski porn.
There's something to be said for that. And for you guys, it's Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
I get that. But I think the consumer likes Groundhog Day in some situations.
I agree. Why has Warren Miller been so successful?
Yeah.
They produce pretty much the same movie every year, little twists, but pretty much the same, and they crush. They are bigger than every other movie combined.
I feel like the saving grace of that year, and I believe it was that year, was you and your wife Elise creating, it's called Backcountry Skiing, and it was a little webisode series where you guys went out and you guys were as cheesy as you could possibly be, and you brought some humor back to skiing where I feel like at that point in time it just wasn't there.
Yeah, well, the biggest thing was Elise and I had been pitching for years, like, we should do a segment together. We're like husband and wife, and like, she rips, and all the film companies were saying no to her. We kept being like, come on, we should do a segment together. This seems like it would work. No one was saying, no one was biting. So I bought a camera, bought a tripod, and we came up with that idea. And I'm like, let's just film this ourselves. So we were literally pointing the camera at ourselves and made that whole edit and came up with the concept and just put it out there. And it did really well. And then we were like, okay, now they're going to come calling. Still didn't come calling. So we ended up doing a second version of it again because we're like, people like these. It got like 100,000 views off of like nothing. It was just super cheesy and joking. And we were getting like people just being like, that's what I want to do with my husband, my wife, like it was showing this fun side of a couple having fun in the backcountry together. And it took a few years to finally get a film company to actually bite on doing a segment with her and I. That was why we did it. We're like, they're not believing in this. Let's just prove it that this is going to work.
And then there are more MSP movies after that. I can't remember. Was it Far Out? Was that one? Or is that TGR?
That's a TGR.
Sorry. Was In Deep or...
Well, let's see. After Ruin and Rose. No, that wasn't
the one you were funny in the next one.
Oh, that was Not All In. It was the last one, the one right before that. Why am I blanking on the name? I'm terrible with names. Like, Gaffney came back and edited it and had the concept and was just like, all right, we're going back to our original roots. And that was where Elise and I finally got to film together. And we made a funny, super fun edit. It was awesome.
And that brought Matchstick back. People were kind of confused for a year, and you guys were back. And I feel like I've said it in the podcast kind of at your expense at times, but you have the McConkey role in Matchstick now. You're like the funny guy, and you are a funny guy. Do you feel the pressure of having to be funny in skiing sometimes?
It's funny. I find myself outside of when I'm skiing, I'm not super funny. Like, I like comedy and we kind of joke around with friends, but just like anyone else. But I feel like I just get so energized by skiing that it just makes me do stupid shit.
Okay.
And so I did look as McConkey as a hero, and I don't feel like I'm trying to mimic him, but I just kind of felt attracted to it. And I've always thought it's the funnest thing in the world. And when I'm out there having fun, I end up doing dumb stuff, and then people find it funny. So I feel like I don't have the pressure. It just kind of ends up coming naturally. Though I do try and think of funny edits because they're kind of what inspire me the most when, I have a new idea for one of our 50 project episodes. And all of a sudden, once I think of it, I'm like, that is gold, and I can't get it out of my head. I'm going to do that. We've done 2 funny edits already for the 50 project. Mm-hmm. 1 has come out, but I just like having humor a part of it because it just shows that you're just having fun and it's not super serious, because skiing isn't serious to me. It's like not doing anything for the planet. It's not doing any good for society. It's a very self-fulfilling, we do this because it's fun kind of thing. It's like my philosophy of skiing. Why else would you do it? I don't do it for fitness. I do it because it's fun. Like, definitely don't do it to try and get rich. I don't do it because it was like, oh, this is going to be a good career opportunity. It's because it's fun.
Now you've got your own, you've had many projects, but this new project that you've got is an interesting one. It's called the 50 Project. And with this one, why don't I not explain the 50 Project? Why don't you explain the 50 Project?
Okay, so for me, I'd reached a certain level within freeride skiing where it started to get stale. It's probably the lamest thing in the world to say, but I was bored of heli skiing, which is like kind of like, you're like, wow, what a jaded asshole. I would say that to my wife, and she didn't have as many heli opportunities as me, and she'd be like, oh, go fuck yourself. And it sucks, but it was like I wasn't feeling passionate about it. And I was realizing every summer when I was growing up, all I could think about was skiing. Then that started pushing up where it was like in July, I would think about like, what am I going to do this year? And just be so obsessed with it. And then all of a sudden it'd be like December. And I was like, oh, what's winter? It's not going to, okay, I go do it again. And I was feeling like I was kind of plateauing. And I reached this level where it's feeling like a job. And I knew everything that I'd done that was successful was because I was so singularly obsessed with it that I'd end up doing it. So like the crack when I did that line was the product of like 5 years of obsession of trying to think and find that kind of line. And then when I did it, it was like, well, what's next? And I'm like, I don't know. That was the only thing I had fun on this year. Like on that film trip, I remember going up to this cliff. It was like a spine line to like 60 footer. And I just remember being up top going like, yeah, this will be a shot. I could say to myself, and you hear it in the audio, I'm like, well, this is going to hurt. Because I just knew it was going to hurt, but it would be a cool shot. So I send the cliff, I land it, I backslap because it was like kind of hard pack and it freaking hurt. And then I come up and I ski out. I'm like, all right, like, where's the next line? And so it felt kind of just like, I'm just going through the motions. And if I keep doing this, I'm just going to go through the motions till the point I fade off and you're just not in the sport anymore. Or I'm going to fade off and not have fun and get bitter at this. And it's going to feel like the job that it shouldn't be. This should be the thing you're obsessed with. And I went on my first kind of like expedition trip in 2015 where I went to Svalbard. I lied my way to get onto it. We were camping in the Arctic in March. They're like, have you ever winter camped before? I'm like, oh yeah, totally. For sure. Never had winter camp before. So I was like kind of nervous and I went for it. And it was just such a different experience of camping out in the mountains and climbing for your own lines. And I was like, oh my God, there's this whole world that I don't know about. I've been pampered with guides and heli skiing and 5-star chefs at the lodge and just kind of this film world. I'm like, there's this whole element of it I don't even know about. And I started thinking about that and I started to see myself getting more and more drawn to that. And I was still shooting video parts, but I was getting more and more drawn. And there's the book, The 50 Classic Descents of North America. And I just flip through it and look at a line and be like, that is a sick line. That's on the bucket list. I got to do that one day. And then all of a sudden it turned into 1 line to 3 and then to 5. And then I realized one day, I'm like, I should just try and ski them all. And that was like 2 years ago when I thought about it. And then it's always been in my head. I kept it super secret, like only Elise knew about this thought. And I went and did one of the biggest, hardest lines in the book, the Mesner Couloir in Denali, on like kind of a summer vacation trip with Michelle Parker, Johnny Collinson, and Ian McIntosh and Shane Treat. And that was kind of like, this is what I got to do. And spent another year filming. And then that was when this summer, early in the summer, I just came to it at the conclusion. I'm like, in order to do this and accomplish this goal, I have to put everything else aside. I have to change everything and do this. But I can't get this out of my head. I have to focus on this because this is what I want to do. And from there, it was just crafting like, well, how do I remain a pro skier and do this? So I thought of the media stuff. I thought about making a movie. And then I was like, well, then I'd have to like disappear for like 3-4 years and be off doing nothing and then come out and make a movie. And I realized, well, even if I don't do them all, it's not going to be a very good movie. It's going to seem weird. And I came up with a concept. I was like, wait, what if I did like a YouTube show that brings people along for the ride, that produces episodes, turns them right around, shows like the real, the raw, the behind the scenes. You know, we're not shooting with tripods. We are just shooting with a camera pop up. It's GoPros and A7Ss and just capture as much as we can the real life side of it. And started pitching sponsors on that. Was able to get them to support me enough to do it. The hardest part was announcing it because I knew when I announced that, like, I'm going to try to ski all 50, I like committed myself to the public and I committed myself to, okay, this is your life for the next few years is trying to do this.
Did you commit yourself to 49? Because I don't think you're doing Messner again.
No. So I've done a few of them before and I'm going to do all of the ones that I've repeated except for the Messner. Mainly because there's a few really, really tough lines that have only been skied once or twice. And the Messner is one that only comes in like once every 5 years kind of deal.
Okay.
And so we got really lucky and I skied it in great condition. So I was like, I don't need to go back and do that again. But like things like Terminal Cancer and Mount Superior and all those I'll repeat because they're fun lines. All the ones I did before were pretty easy.
What's the timeline for the project? Is it 3 or 4 years? Because you've got, 6-month windows where you can probably work each year. I mean, if you could work a full year, you could get this thing done in 2 years because you'd have 2 weeks, you could crank out an episode, and every 2 weeks you could probably do it. It'd be a shitload of work for you. But what are you looking at the timeline?
So I gave myself 3 years, but that's the shortest minimum time frame. I kind of thought I could potentially do this in 3 years. Whether I get done with 3 years and I haven't done it and I continue, I don't know. I was just like, for the next 3 years, this is what I'm going to do. And I kind of wanted to commit myself because I knew it was going to be tough. I knew I'm going to have low moments, I get tired of it, but I want to learn to push through. I want to learn to push yourself, even though you're physically exhausted, to go climb another big peak the day after you just climbed an 8,000 foot peak or whatever it is. So I gave myself 3 years. I think I'd have to get really lucky for it to happen, honestly. So far, I would say we've been really lucky. We're ahead of schedule.
What are you, 5 now?
Well, 5 episodes out, but I've got 6 more on the back burner. So we're pretty ahead of schedule, and I'm about to go into the busiest point of the year. So we're looking to do 16 to 17 lines in year 1. And per year, that's how it kind of breaks down. The hard part is that most of the lines that are doable in April and May. So all of a sudden you stack yourself up with tons of stuff. January, you can't ski to Grand, Grand Teton. It's just not safe. So you kind of have to space it out. And then I go super heavy in the spring, but we'll see. The big part of this was I'm not the most likely person to do this. There is far more talented ski mountaineers, far more fit kind of like ski tours, far more bold alpinists than I am that will take far more risk than I will. That literally put their life on the line at every second and just barely escape in the skin of their teeth. I don't want to do that. But what I looked at it was like, this is my opportunity to learn this world. This is my opportunity to push myself and get so singularly focused on this that I'm going to expand my ski ability, my knowledge of mountains and my skiing more than I have in the last 5 years. And I would say in the last 2 months, I've learned more about mountains and skiing than I have in the last 4 or 5 years.
Wow. Well, it's pretty cool. You're bringing in other skiers as well. I know Pep has been a part of a few of them, which is great to see. I'm sure there's going to be countless other skiers by the time you get through all 50 of these. Where can people subscribe to this?
So it's on YouTube. It's my personal YouTube channel. So it's youtube.com/Cody Townsend/C. but you can kind of Google the 50 Project and it pops right up. That's where most of it's based. Obviously, I promote it through my social media channels, but the YouTube is kind of where I'm trying to just focus all the energy and just try and bi-weekly episodes, essentially.
So that's what Cody's going to be doing for the next 3 years. And what we're going to be doing now is something you've done before. It's called Inappropriate Questions. And this time, can't say I was that really prepared, but I did have someone record, and they did quite well. It was Roy Tuscany.
Oh, nice.
And he had some questions for you, so I'm going to come over here and play them once I figure out where they are. All right, Roy, what's your first inappropriate question for Cody Townsend?
Cody, you are a part of an elusive club, the Poop Club of Lake Tahoe. Who has the greatest poop in the club?
Before we get into this answer, first, what is the Poop Club of Squaw Valley? Because as a dude your age, being part of a poop club is kind of weird.
Yeah, it is. It is a little weird. It's actually technically called the Breachers Club. So it's a circle of friends. It was definitely inspired by Shane, who at one point on a heli trip, I believe, was taking Polaroid pictures of his poos and putting them up on the wall in the hotel while waiting on down days for the heli. And then it became a competition. So the Breachers Club is your poo actually has to breach the water. So we have a text thread about 9 guys, and you got to get initiated in. And essentially, you send them a picture of your glorious breacher. And we at one point had like awards, say end of the year awards and whatnot. So it was quite serious. It's kind of tapered off a little bit, but yeah, definitely. I would say everyone outside of our circle thinks it's about the most disgusting thing on the planet, but it's pretty funny. We have rules too, though. No pictures before 8 a.m. So you're like, the first thing you do, wake up and you just see a picture of your buddy's giant poo. You're like, dude, come on. There's no teepee in the toilet. Can't have that. And it's got a breach. I did win one year out of glorious one. It was awesome.
That's question number 1. Let's jump into question number 2.
All right, between yourself and Chris Benchetler, whose dog would win in an all-out dog fight?
Now, I think the tail of the tape has to be said. Your dog, Theo the Brave, is sitting here at the table with us. Theo weighs in at a whopping
2.5 pounds.
2.5 pounds, and that's no shit. I saw Cody write that on the internet recently, that my dog was 2 pounds. And he came to the interview with his dog, and I looked at the dog and I was like, wow, that dog really is 2 pounds. It's so cute. It's so tiny. And Ben Chetler's dog was the inspiration for your dog. And he's what, a whopping like 6 pounds?
I think 4.5. So yeah, like double his size practically.
And who would win, Theo the Brave or the Ben Chetler's dog, which I don't know its name?
I would say Reese, the Ben Chetler's dog, would win because it's already happened, I think. We were hoping they would be best friends, and I think Reese was a little bit more like, no, this is my territory, and like chased him off. But Theo has actually, he got attacked by like a 25-pound dog and went fighting back and chased this 25-pound dog off of him, which is pretty impressive. But you know, the one thing about Theo, he's kind of a lover, not a fighter. So I think Reese would take him, unfortunately. But we're hoping one day they're going to be close friends.
All right, and we're going to go with our final question from Roy.
Why have you never come back to defend your Saucer Boy title?
You won the Payne McSlunky, the biggest win of your entire career. Sure, you won the Freeride World Tour event your first time ever. That doesn't mean anything compared to the event here. Yeah. It's going on tomorrow. Are you going to be a part of it?
I'm actually not. I'm going to go to the gala. But yeah, I've always wondered that. I'm like, I should go do it again. But, you know, I won the first year. I kicked everyone's ass. I got that golden saucer. It's sitting right there. Don't need to defend it. I've got it for life. So I know I've always kind of wanted to, but I don't know. I just kind of feel like I should spread the love because essentially I would win every year that I do it. And I do want other people to at least have a chance.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for your time. You've been doing it for a long time at the top of the ski industry, and you've done it with a lot of class and humor. You've just been a good dude who's, I would say, rolled with the punches of the industry and put yourself up to the top and created a back end for you with Arcade. And it's always nice to see you and refreshing to see you on film. And I thank you for your time, man.
Thank you. I'm still stoked. I'm still here. As we do, you'll see some hashtags. It's hashtag we're still doing it.
So that was time with Cody Townsend, and what a career that dude has had, and it's still going. He's been on Salomon for 20 years. That is so crazy to me. I'm sure he's been on the brand longer than most employees and almost as long as Mike Douglas. And there's a reason that Cody has had these sponsor relationships for so long. Aside from the talent that he definitely has, Cody is not afraid to work hard. And I feel like that is the most important quality someone can have, the outwork you trait. And outworking you is something that Cody's been doing his whole career. From sending trip reports to creating his own project and distribution, Cody has taken control of his career, and if he keeps doing what he's doing, he'll be a paid professional skier for a long time to come. So while his career was a question mark in the beginning, it's all about making it happen and working hard, and that applies to everything in life. That's the show for this week. I want to thank you for listening, ask you to post on your social media about an episode you like, because if you like it, I bet your friends are going to like it too. And finally, I want to thank my sponsors for making this show happen. They are Evo, Rescue Water, the 10 Barrel Brewery, and Spy Optic. Have a great week, everyone.